The ambition for this piece of work was really to build on some developments within local health and social care partnerships around how digital can be an enabler to improving outcomes for citizens. And while we had lots of developing projects and programs, we've recognised that we needed to get underneath that a bit and try and look at how we get a more transformative approach.
The Transforming Local Systems Pathfinder programme seeks to address two of the areas from the Digital Health and Care Strategy. Firstly, the issue of whole system transformation, which is digitally enabled, but which focuses on all partners involved in delivering services and supports to citizens and shaping those services and supports around the needs of the citizen, not the drivers of service delivery or service structures. And the second was that the Digital Health and Care Strategy wanted to test and to apply the Scottish approach to service design, and this seemed an ideal programme in which to do that.
The Scottish approach to service design is a vision for Scotland where the people living in Scotland are empowered to get involved in the definition, the design and the delivery of their public services.
Within tech, we were very sort of taken with the concept of the Scottish approach to service design, but recognise that it's not something that's in the easy to do box, and it's not a transactional piece of work that you can say, done a project, tick the box, off we go. So we had to really, I suppose, work on our thinking and working with the local partnerships that expressed interest in being involved in the Pathfinder to begin to navigate what a programme might do and what might emerge.
So we've designed a programme that really takes the core principles of the Scottish approach to service design and supports the teams to learn about service design approaches, design-led tools, methods and ways of working so that they can work with the users, whether they are citizens, patients, families or staff, and they can design a solution to a problem that is actually meeting their needs.
There are 7 principles to the Scottish approach to service design. The first is that we explore and define the problem before we design the solution. The second, and the one that I think is the most important, is that we design service journeys around people and not around how the public sector is organised. Far too often we stay within our silos, we stay within our organisations, instead of thinking about how our organisations meet the needs of people living their everyday lives. The third principle is that we seek citizen participation in our projects from day one, that we involve citizens at the very start of our programme in research, in understanding their lives, in making sense of that research, and then in defining the problems that we want to solve and coming up with solutions for those problems. And again, involving them when we test those solutions to make sure they are fit for purpose. Principle 4 is that we use inclusive and accessible research and design methods so citizens can participate fully and meaningfully. Principle 5 is using the core set of tools and methods of the Scottish approach to service design. There are a whole host of tools available on the internet. Finding the right tool is what's important here, whether it's a QI tool, a design tool, or even a tool that you've designed yourself. It's about context. Whether you want to engage with a certain group of people, or maybe you want to involve somebody in a co-design session and to come up with lots of creative ideas. Principle 6 is about sharing and reusing user research insights, service patterns and components wherever possible. And finally, the 7th principle is about contributing to continually building the Scottish approach to service design, methods, tools and community. Designing for health and social care is different from designing in government. There is so much learning that we can take from the work that has been done by these 4 Pathfinders to support the development of the community and of the approach moving forwards. At the heart of this approach is the Double Diamond. It's probably the most well-known service design process out there, and it was created by the Design Council in 2007. There are 4 phases to the Double Diamond: discover, define, develop and deliver. And our Pathfinder teams are currently coming towards the end of the first diamond. The way we describe the double diamond is that the first diamond is about understanding your problem space before going into the second diamond to design the right solution. The shape of the double diamond is really important. By going big in Discover, you're encouraged to explore all sorts of data, all sorts of experiences, understand your user needs. And as patterns start to emerge, that's when you begin to refine down to culminate in a problem statement and an understanding of the problems to solve at the centre of the double diamond. Then, focusing on your problem to solve, you go big again. You start to understand that problem in more detail, come up with lots of ideas, lots of creative ideas for how you could solve that. And you test those ideas, prototyping, tests of change, refining and iterating down until you're ready to go live with a solution that works. This quote by Tim Brown, chair of IDEO, really sums up what we're trying to achieve through this Tech Pathfinder programme. And he says, design thinking is a human-centred approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of the people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for business success.
The focus of the programme is on supporting prevention and self-management, incorporating digital technology where it makes sense to do so. And we've selected 4 Pathfinder areas to test this approach in relation to an important system of service transformation for them locally in their health and care partnership and with their wider partners. The 4 areas are the Highland Pathfinder, Aberdeen City, Midlothian and East Ayrshire. And each of these Pathfinders are working together with partners both locally but also elsewhere in Scotland as named partners as an attempt to spread and sustain the learning from the programme and to help them test some of the approaches that they come up with as part of their programmes.
So here in Highland, our Pathfinders focused on transforming the services available to people with long-term respiratory conditions, things like asthma, bronchiectasis and COPD. So the discover phase of the project is really all about finding out what the issues are, finding out what the problems are. So that's really doing research with users primarily.
We had a lot of data that we'd collected across 4 main types of sources. So we had qualitative data from workshops with participants and healthcare professionals. We had a patient survey, which had been carried out by the tech team. We had a review of secondary data carried out by our specialist respiratory consultants, and we had evidence from the third sector partners around their lived experience with patients and research that they had conducted.
We had a lot of findings with around 15 main areas, and it must have been about 120 different individual issues that came up.
In particular, we had new data emerge around patient experience of life with symptoms before they had ever come into contact with the NHS. And we had new data emerge on what it was like to live with these symptoms before diagnosis. So one of the things we did was to make patient and healthcare professional personas that encapsulated some of the key themes and some of the key experiences that patients and healthcare professionals had told us about. These personas will be important for us as we move into ideation type activities, because they help us really quite literally keep the patient or the healthcare professional perspective in front of us while we are brainstorming and trying to develop our ideas for actual change to services.
So during Define, we undertook several exercises to collate the findings from all the research we'd undertaken from the different sources, what's sometimes called to triangulate the findings.
So we wanted to synthesize, to look at key themes, and to be able to really hone down what are the key messages coming out of the data, but to do that in a way that wouldn't lose the nuances and the really kind of rich description around people's lived experience.
And what we found was that we had a really good match with the same issues coming up again and again from our different sources. So our next step was to prioritise which of these was most important for us to address. That is, which, if we addressed these issues, would have the biggest positive impact for patients. And to prioritise, we asked both healthcare professionals, but more particularly patients, to do that prioritisation.
So at the end of the prioritisation stage, we had 4 prioritised areas from the core team, and we had 4 prioritised areas from patients. And we had a narrative around both. So we had the reasoning from the core team and the reasoning from the patients about why these were their prioritised areas for change.
So the final outcome from that was for us to focus on 4 key issues. So firstly, to improve patient understanding of their respiratory condition and their pathway through the respiratory services, to provide patients with access to support, to signposting and to self-management throughout the pathway. Thirdly, to improve GP knowledge of respiratory conditions and when and who to refer to. That's both within secondary care and other organisations they could refer to. And finally, to improve data sharing and flow. So to improve the sharing of information, especially between primary and secondary care. So lots of big issues to think about.
Taking this particular approach, taking the Scottish approach to service design, has allowed us to understand much more about the holistic needs of patients. So I think we've uncovered what it's like to be someone living with respiratory symptoms, to understand what it's like to receive a diagnosis and to engage with the health service, third sector and self-management activities in a really in-depth way.
So our project is looking at Aberdeen City, and the focus of our project is looking at support pathways for people who experience domestic abuse.
The original purpose of the project was try to improve the life outcomes of people, but also to return them to the life that they had before these traumatic things happened to them.
So the purpose of Discovery, and for us especially, is to explore that problem space openly with the people who experience those problems. So for us, it was about understanding the scope of the subject of domestic abuse, because it is an extremely multifaceted and very intersectional subject, and also looking at what provision was in the city around support pathways, and really speaking to the people who deliver that support and receive that support or try and access that support to understand both of their perspectives.
Domestic abuse just happens everywhere and it's endemic. And as different stakeholders got together and as user research started to come in, it was obvious that people were seeing tentacles of this around the system. But what we suddenly realised that we were seeing, it was an octopus, and nobody had had that picture before of just what this octopus looked like.
So obviously, taking a user-centred approach, we need to be legal, inclusive and ethical and accessible. And, you know, being guided by the Scottish approach to service design, that's a key kind of fundamental approach to how we're trying to do things. And I suppose that was really high on our agenda and really key, and also one of the drivers for splitting our user research into 2. So we would be able to achieve many of those things by working in partnership with the stakeholders first, to then help to support our knowledge of how to do that effectively. And when it came to citizen engagement, how we engage with people and especially stakeholders, we conducted a lot of one-to-one interviews. We did a lot of kind of journey mapping sessions. We also did a lot of stakeholder mapping and lots of sense-making workshops, sense-checking exercises with different stakeholders from different services. So anything from kind of third sector straight into kind of health and social care as well.
We had huge whiteboards up and different stickies around and connections, and I think a lot of our staff began to really appreciate what was needed when we're looking at how services interconnect and how improvement can be engendered. And I think what was interesting was the way our language started to change. So suddenly everyone was talking about pain points and talking about you know, not making any assumptions.
The current space that we're sitting in at the moment, we're writing up a lot of this information to give us space to kind of reflect on the information that we've collected, and also possibly highlight any gaps that we might have to kind of go back in and do a bit more research. But as I said, it's such a multifaceted and intersectional subject that sometimes it's quite difficult to try and find the edges of that.
And we need to know where it's really working, but also what changes can be made to make it even better. And we're only going to do that if we talk to individuals themselves about how they go through our systems.
So where do we see ourselves going next? I suppose the natural next step is to take all the information that we've collected, everything that we've refined, highlighted all the key challenges, and then to go back to stakeholders and say, okay, this is what we've uncovered, this is what you've told us, this is what you've kind of prioritized. Who would like to join us in that next stage of developing responses to some of those challenges? How that works in practice is an interesting one because of COVID and also the sensitivity of the subject, but we won't know until we go and ask them, really.
The main focus of the Tech Pathfinder within Midlothian is looking at the way in which people live with frailty in Midlothian. So understanding what keeps them well and understanding what some of the challenges are that exist within our services.
It's an opportunity for us to look at how we can support the system and redesign the flow of information primarily, which is where we started from, but how can we redesign our program to be more person-centred.
During Discover, we worked with health and care professionals who make up the frailty system of care in Midlothian. We had a large-scale mapping workshop where we plotted out all the different people, organisations and information flows in the system. We also did a large piece of work around understanding the needs of citizens living with frailty in Midlothian. We worked with the participants to map out their circle of care, including their family and community activities, health and care professionals and resources, third sector organisations and groups, and commercial tools and businesses that all play a part in keeping people well.
So one of our questions was, what keeps you well? And this then enabled the service user and the participant to talk about so many different parts of their life, not just health and social care services, but other organisations or hobbies and interests that they have.
We also conducted wider public engagement around the theme of positive experiences of ageing, and that was in response to some research that we found that highlighted that even the word frailty can actually give quite negative connotations which stop people accessing services. We decided to change our approach, and we couldn't see a way where we could conduct that in a face-to-face setting. So we took the same questions and we adapted them into a pop-up greeting card. The cards were posted out to people who use the British Red Cross service, and they engage people around this theme of what is positive around ageing and what helps keep people well as they get older.
So what this has allowed us to do is really understand our service users better, which has then allowed us to feed into different consultations across the partnership and really starting to build a picture of what matters to the people living in Midlothian.
In the next phase of the Midlothian Pathfinder project, we'll be delving into our interview data. We have a lot of rich data, which is very insightful. And I think for me, it shows that there are lots of different challenges that we could take forward and focus on in the next phase of the project.
I think we are getting to a point where we can start to define what the problem that the problems that we're facing are, and therefore start to get into a solution space that feels a little bit more familiar. I'm really interested in starting to work with the stakeholders and the providers that we're going to need to start to have conversations with to help us build or realize solutions to the problems that we've been finding.
So the focus of East Ayrshire's Pathfinder project is to use tech as a key enabler to fully transform health and social care provision for people with specific long-term health conditions living in the Irvine Valley, and that includes those who are over 65.
This area was chosen as a good mix of rural and urban localities, and a mix of those living in affluent areas and those areas affected by poverty.
We want many citizens of the Irvine Valley to be able to access tech solutions to support them to live at home, improve their ability to self-manage and achieve their personal outcomes.
We've engaged with a lot of people during this process, doing things like user research, speaking to people on the buses, going to the Christmas light switch on, and in total we've had engagement from over 140 people in the Irvine Valley area. While we were speaking to people, we were using the appreciative inquiry model just to kind of find out exactly how people feel. So because of the COVID-19 crisis, we had to begin working remotely as a team. We continued to promote our online survey and produced a paper copy to engage with those who were shielding and housebound. To do this, we liaised with our colleagues in the local pharmacy who were already delivering their prescriptions, so they delivered and collected them.
So East Ayrshire Pathfinder is in the process of defining currently. Usually this process would take place face-to-face, but we have managed to adapt our working onto a collaborative Miro board.
With all the qualitative and quantitative data that we have.
As a team, we are working to refine our themes and gain a greater understanding of the issues in the Irvine Valley. Initial analysis of research and data gathered in Discover highlighted some very interesting points about the Irvine Valley. We found that public transport was mentioned countless times by residents and workers in the Irvine Valley as a main issue within the local area. People mentioned issues with GP services like appointments that don't fit around a 9-to-5 schedule. There is also a perceived lack of mental health provision and accessible support services in the local area. Communication from services to the public and knowledge of local services seems to need improvement, as this was often presented as a key major barrier to accessing health services. We have then been working to sub-theme these using a version of the ISM model. We are using these core insights to identify any further gaps in our data, supporting this with desk research and picking out key and necessary questions to be asked in the stage of data triangulation.
We also used that time to build up skills around digital inclusion, building skills with the involvement of the Connecting Scotland scheme.
So where do East Ayrshire Pathfinder seeing ourselves go next? Well, we are in the defined stage of the Double Diamond currently. We are hoping that data triangulation in this defined stage will take place until mid-January 2021. We're hoping to fill a couple of gaps that we've found in the data by speaking to more male participants, young people, and also speaking to people with specific long-term health conditions as well. Then hopefully we'll be ready to undertake the Develop and Deliver workshop with the national team and start thinking about moving into the second diamond, develop, prototyping some key tech solutions for the Irvine Valley.
I'm really excited to be working on this programme to create something that has never been done before. I personally feel really passionately about digital inclusion and supporting people to live as independently as possible, and I can see a potential for us to hit both of those points during this project. I think that being able to make sustainable real change for the residents of the Irvine Valley and beyond, and allow them to live independently and receive support from both tech and face-to-face successfully and in sync, is really exciting. I cannot wait to start on the develop phase.
Essentially, we were moving into the define phase really just right at the start of lockdown, the first lockdown in March 2020. And the feedback that we had from our third sector partners and from patients as well, is that they were getting a lot of requests for participation in online surveys and online events. So
I think maybe another thing within that is that people just don't have the time or the space to reflect collectively on issues that are happening, especially across different sectors like health and social care and third sector.
I think it's sometimes been difficult to ask people to take part in something that they see as kind of extra or add on to their normal job, which is extremely pressured and difficult, often challenging circumstances as it is. So
we find it really difficult. Obviously, we're working remotely to share files. Different IT systems will allow different things. And obviously that would normally be done kind of sitting in a room doing a face-to-face meeting.
So another kind of key lesson for us during discovery, and especially given us all now kind of working remotely because of COVID, is the importance of a team to be working through the discovery stage.
And working with a considerably, quite a large group of people like that it is time consuming, and it is quite often difficult to get people together.
We are finding that perhaps some of the data is a bit outdated, as some improvements have already been made to services as a result of COVID-19. So, for example, the introduction of near-me appointments for secondary care services.
Having to adapt to COVID and put essentially everything we were doing online has lengthened the time that it's taken us to get through these parts of the project. But I think we've managed to do that as a core group, and we've really engaged with the online and the digital ways of working. I think the approach as well, because it has actually brought together different types of people into the same space, has facilitated conversations that wouldn't have taken place otherwise.
I suppose the most overwhelming thing was the amount of information that we'd been able to gather through discovery. And also one of the most positive things kind of related to that was that people were so willing to share their experiences, especially with such a sensitive subject.
We've actually been able to keep going with our project right through the pandemic, and that's partly because of the dedication of the team in Highland. But one of the things that a lot of us have also seen, and in particular healthcare professionals have commented on, is that there's been a renewed enthusiasm for innovation. So we've actually been able to harness that as an opportunity.
Actually, holding remote meetings has, I think, worked quite well for us in many cases. And one of the reasons it's worked well is that it means that people can join meetings who otherwise wouldn't be able to. Here in the Highlands, obviously, we're trying to involve people from throughout the Highlands, and there's no way people would all be able to come together in face-to-face meetings.
In terms of the access that we've had to engaging with British Red Cross service users and with Vocal has been a real treat.
I think it's just been great, because we have to start with the individual's experience, because that is what they're going through. And you know, we've talked a lot in the third sector about lived experience and how important lived experience is in shaping services and shaping approaches to how people recover. And it's not just about domestic abuse, it's about people in recovery from all sorts of life-changing events that they're experiencing. And whether we like it or not, health and social care is about life-changing events, you know.
So using this approach has kind of shown how important it is, and reminded me how important it is to build the service around the person. Otherwise, you know, they're not going to use it. It's not going to be of any use.
So the Scottish approach to service design is, on the one hand, something that's very new, but on the other hand, is actually building on ideas that I think have been around for quite a long time, and taking those forward in a more structured way.
I think to the organisation and our partners, what's been really great is the way in which we've coalesced around this project. The methodology gives sort of validity to the time and the new way of doing something.
I think it has been a really unique way of working, and certainly what I really liked about it is it's allowed me to think about actually why I do this job, and that's around making a difference to people. And I feel the Tech Pathfinder and the approach that it's provided us with has allowed me to put the patient back at the centre of the work I'm doing.
And I think it's allowed us to make the connection between what it's like to be a patient or a person living with a respiratory condition, and then how we can actually make specific change within the NHS and our wider services that we provide in order to make that experience better for people's everyday lives.
I think there's huge potential for the approach that's been developed over the last 2 years around transforming local systems. And for me, just reflecting on the last 9 months where we've had to work exceedingly fast and hard to put some services, tools and approaches in place, which is absolutely the right thing to do given the real emergency and requirement to respond. But I think it's at our peril that we ignore the importance of the relationships, the conversations, the co-design. And I think embedding the Scottish approach to service design in the way we think, the way we develop and the way we deliver, I think it's got huge potential. And I'm sure we will, reflect on some of the fantastic achievements, but also just pause and ensure that as we go forward, we take account of the principles and the approaches that I think will probably lead us to a much more sustainable position with citizens at the centre, and our focus on that well-being and engagement within communities.
Okay. So whilst I wait for everyone to join, I just want to introduce myself because I didn't do that at the start. My name is Alex Clarke. I am a service designer in the Improvement Hub within Healthcare Improvement Scotland, and I work with the national team to design and deliver the Transforming Local Systems Pathfinder programme. Before I go around and get everyone to introduce themselves, I wanted to just quickly apologise as well. The quality of that video, on my end at least, didn't look that great. Which is unfortunate because it was HD, I do promise you, and the picture was better, so apologies for that. Margot, if we start with you and then go to Alexia, Joanna, Matthew, and then Ali.
Hi, I'm Margot White. I'm the programme lead for the Transforming Systems Pathfinder programme in the tech programme, the Digital Health and Care Directorate of the Scottish Government.
Hi, I'm Alexia Pellowe. I'm a GP and clinical lead for the East Ayrshire Tech Pathfinder project.
Hello, I'm Joanna Gillier, the project manager from the NHS Highlands Pathfinder project.
Hi, I'm Matthew Curl. I'm the digital program lead in Midlothian Health and Social Care Partnership.
Hi, I'm Ali Jones. I am the project manager and service designer on the Aberdeen Tech Pathfinder project.
Brilliant, thank you all. So we've got a bit of time for a Q&A. There have been a couple of questions that have come in the chat box, but if anybody has any more that they want to put in, please feel free to put them in there and I will ask our team here some questions. But I thought I would kick off with one of the questions that was put in the chat box around citizen participation and involvement in a virtual kind of landscape. And obviously, you'll have seen in the video that COVID has thrown that challenge towards our Pathfinders as well, as they're in the discover and define phases. But I wondered, Matthew, if you might talk to us a little bit about the experience of involving people during the pandemic and before within your Pathfinder.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah. So we were at the start, as everybody was, engagement in the normal way, going to see people. Our design partner, the DHI, and Gemma Teal, who's working with us, who you saw in the video, had constructed some interesting tools to help us, and some beautiful tools to help us, really, around pop-ups and engagements to pop out and record the voice of Midlothian, to help us get a sound wall, and a visually interesting one that would help us capture something just as an experience, as well as an interactive discussion tool to go out and build those maps, those circles of care that you saw on cork boards, and work with citizens to capture their narrative. And all that had to be redesigned in a short space of time, and it was. We ended up with cards, foldable cards that went out, which was the pop-up wall, and it asked the questions in the same way and allowed people to complete what kept them well in Midlothian. They went out to our partner, the Red Cross. The variety of interactions that the Red Cross have with the citizens in Midlothian. We also had a digital version of that card as well, and we got both channels, completed forms through both channels. And then the interactive sessions with citizens had to be redesigned over the telephone. And again, we used our relationship with the third sectors, with Vocal and the Red Cross, to make sure that people that we were already building up a relationship with, we were able to engage and capture the audio on Teams, and allow for thematic analysis. Then that final circle of care went back out to the person, so we had that sense check, and there was an opportunity to look over the circles of care. And now we are planning how we take that forwards to the next stage of citizen engagement.
Thank you. Joanna, I wondered if you wanted to come in and talk a bit about how Highland have been kind of engaging with people.
So we started out the work that the UHI colleagues were doing. They started out doing a lot of workshops with patients, and indeed with GPs and other healthcare professionals, but workshops with patients around the Highlands, and most of those had been done when the pandemic started, but there was still work to do with patients. But we have also had a lot of support from our third sector partners, Chest, Heart, Stroke Scotland, and an organisation called Lego It, which works with people with long-term health conditions, which is based locally. And they, during the pandemic, have actually had huge success in engaging their members online, in all sorts of different workshops and activities and so on. So they've got a great deal of experience of that. And we've been able to learn from their experience. We haven't done as well, I don't think, as we would have liked in terms of online workshops with patients. When given the choice, the patients we have talked to seem to prefer telephone or filling out a survey, a physical survey put through the post. And they have filled out surveys very, very thoroughly. I mean, they've engaged with them really, really well. So we haven't done an awful lot of work online with patients so far, but we have had some engagement we had a big workshop just recently for all our stakeholders, and we had quite a good representation from patients and carers at that. And so that's really great, because we're hoping we can build on that for the next stages and get those I hope that those people will continue to engage with us during the next stages, which again, of course, will be online.
Definitely. Alexia, I wonder if you have anything you wanted to add?
I think I would just agree that problem with the pandemic and the lockdown and people taking to shielding really affected our ability to be able to get that engagement with the public. We'd done some great, really hit the ground running with going on the buses, meeting people who'd commented about how transport was an issue, doing some engagement events within the community as well. And then it just felt like a big wall had been put up that really needed to find workarounds, which took us a lot of time really to get there. So we did instead turn the questionnaire into a paper format, and I think that was really good that we could collaborate with the pharmacy locally, knowing the delivery drivers were doing the runs anyway, and we could try and reach the people there that we really wanted to hear their opinions of how we could stop that isolation and lack of connectivity and keep them engaged with us and with the project. So that was good. And I saw in the chat box there about Anne-Marie Doherty's asking about being able to engage with learning disabled people. So we've actually had conversations with the local learning disability support nurse, who herself has had her own problems in being able to maintain that engagement, and especially the digital exclusion that's going on. So there's been devices provided, and she is going to try and help us liaise into finding out more what those needs are of those people.
Thank you. And I think all three of you have kind of talked about as well the importance of third sector partnerships. And Ali, I know that you were relying quite heavily on your third sector links for how you were going to be engaging with survivors of domestic abuse. And I know that became quite a challenge during COVID. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, I suppose, the plans you had and how COVID did end up in many ways kind of pausing those.
Yeah, pretty much. So just as kind of March hit, we were supposed to start engaging with citizens, and as Alex said, we were really reliant on especially specialist services supporting us to then go and engage with survivors and victims. So that was very much kind of put on pause, and Katie, who was our user researcher, and myself had to really kind of look at what information was out there already to see how we could maybe adapt our approach. But we didn't necessarily find a way around it. We've just had to be reliant on what information is already out there and what we could do online. So we were hoping to set up a citizen reference group who could co-design our approach to engaging with other citizens, but obviously we were relying on specialist services to do that. So we kind of parked that, which we kind of hope to bring back for the next stage of development. But we, like everyone else, have had to change it. So we did an online citizen consultation. We've worked with other organisations, so we worked really closely with Safe Lives to see if we could do any proxy engagement and to take a lot of their data as well, or to share a lot of their data, not take it. But yeah, just kind of try and find workarounds. But I must say it's not as straightforward an answer as everyone else. We've kind of had to feel our way through it. And also because of capacity, because it was just Katie and I kind of working our way through that. So yeah, every day's a learning day, and we've had to adapt it greatly. Also, just as a kind of side point, we were very conscious because of the subject of domestic abuse that we didn't want to be asking people these questions and then leaving them in their home with it. So that was kind of the guiding thing with us the whole way through it, that we wanted to maybe just avoid that at the moment and then come back to it when it's a bit safer and a bit less risky.
Your kind of stakeholder mapping and network really covered a huge range of different organisations and community groups. And we've got a question here about kind of housing. Was housing involved in when you were mapping out around domestic abuse?
They're a key player. They're part of processes like MARAC and kind of the Violence Against Women Partnership Group. So, you know, I said a lot in that presentation about the intersectionality of people's experiences and about kind of the need for refuge and the need to kind of flee situations and stuff. So I think from our research, we know that housing should be part of it. I don't know to what degree they are and what roles and responsibilities they're actually kind of fulfilling there. But yes, in response, yes, they are. They should be.
Perfect, thank you. So one of the other questions that we've got here is how do you find working in a more non-traditional way? For example, not having a specific end product to kind of focus on at the very, very beginning. And I might come to you again for this one, Matthew, if that's okay.
Yeah, then that's fine. For those, the benefit of the audience, Alex cautioned me at our sort of pitch for this project to begin with, when in order to try and articulate what we wanted to do, I was very much in the solution space. I had an idea, at least I could phrase it in something. And I have a slide when we put up our work to say how we're going on. It's Alice falling down the rabbit hole. I always have another slide about I don't know where I've necessarily gone where I intended to, but I've wound up where I needed to be, and I keep both of those in my mind at all time. I was told to trust the process, and it would work, and it is working by being uncomfortable and by embracing that. And having faith in it, I've got myself in a much better position, I think, to embrace and understand what the Scottish approach to service design is trying to do. And I think our experience of discover and define has been a lot richer as a result.
Perfect, thank you. And Margot, I might kind of come to you as well, just kind of about, I suppose, a non-traditional way of doing this programme. Obviously, as kind of lead of the project, kind of what have you experienced, I suppose, taking this approach and trying to support the teams in this approach? And I know we've got some resources as well, potentially, that might be worth talking about.
Yes, I guess the being comfortable with being uncomfortable starts with us as well, because as a national programme, and Margaret will agree that significant resources are being put behind this approach, to not be able to say to senior sponsors what's going to be delivered as a result of it, and to be asking them to trust us, and to be getting people to hold that space on behalf of the Pathfinders, as well as the national programme, is quite a challenge. I have to say, we've had fantastic support. At our launch event, we had 2 directors general and a minister represented. We have had a lot of engagement and enthusiasm about this, and I'm going to try to share a resource. I don't know if I am, is the issue, because it says share. Did that share? Yes, that did share. Somebody, oh, okay. Let's not bother with that. But what we've got is a resource that we're developing, that we're co-producing with the Pathfinders, and that we're trying to use it as an interactive resource. So it's got the double diamond and all of the activities of the double diamond, and some of the tools that you might use, and some using a combination of sources about what trying to use. That we've incorporated, working with the Office of the Chief Designer and some of the digital service standards, on what the different stages of the Scottish approach to service design are trying to achieve, trying to de-digitize that so that it's universally applicable. This is a whole system transformation we're talking about, so it will almost inevitably involve digital technology, what the broadest possible term for that. Matthew tells me off about my language around digital, so that I'm not always all-encompassing, but also human systems, and the way that we interact with people. So that resource is developing, and we will have that available to help spread this approach across health and care and wider partners as we go along. And I think Margaret was trying to come in there.
Okay, I'm gonna just, oh, Margaret, do you want to come in?
Sorry, again. Trying to, no, I'm just saying, I think just listening to the stories and experience from the Pathfinders, it really does bring it alive in terms of the importance of this approach. And I think, as I said on the video, I think when we're so focused on doing things very, very quickly, and obviously within the context of COVID and the emergency. But as I say, I think it's going to be really important to ensure that this approach informs both the refresh of digital health and care strategy, but as importantly, that wider recovery and mobilisation across health, housing and care in terms of the work. So just really reinforcing what you said, but yeah, just really, really good to hear the Pathfinders talking about their approach, experience and the learning so far.
Perfect, thank you. So what I would love for our Pathfinders to do just now, if possible, is I would love to hear maybe kind of one key learning, and that can be specific about your program and what you've learned there, or just more general in your own practice that you would like to take forwards and will continue to take forwards. And also one thing that you think would be useful to be changed for another version of this program. Obviously, this isn't set in stone. We're very much on a learning journey with you, and the videos that we've taken for today are so helpful in kind of giving us that reflection and that feedback. So I would love to hear from you. One thing that you will be taking forwards from your learning, and another thing that we should be one thing that we could be changing for the next iteration. So if we go Ali first.
Remember what you asked me. I suppose the one key learning also kind of ties into what we hope to take forward, and that for us would be to involve, kind of practically for us with the subject of domestic abuse, try and involve a specialist service from the very beginning. So being a partner on the project, because that helps to maybe focus in your subject area a little bit more, because as you probably can all imagine, like the subject of domestic abuse every day, it grows arms and legs, and it's sometimes hard for us to find the edges of that. So kind of that idea of kind of user-centered working with the services as well, to kind of prioritize and kind of focus in at the beginning, and then kind of work out from your discovery period and kind of go and explore that a bit more openly. So very much about kind of not creating your boundaries, because you have to sit within that problem space, but when you have a subject so complex like domestic abuse, kind of trying to find different areas to focus in on at the beginning, and then opening up that kind of worms and going through there. I hope that makes sense.
That we should do differently next time?
Oh, that's a tricky question. I suppose maybe. Can you come back to me about that? Because I don't really. Thank you.
All right, everyone else had a bit longer to think. Who wants to Alexia?
I'm the same with you, Ali. I'm like, remember what I'm going back to answer. So I think one thing to keep, one thing that I've enjoyed is probably more on a personal basis, which is this Scottish approach to service design. So I think that first diamond so often gets missed, that having the chance when day-to-day in GP, we're normally just on a hamster wheel trying to keep up with the workload and do the job in itself, and having this space and time to get out of that and look back in on it and see what it is like for the people that are living nearby, and what other things are going on, what's the bigger picture, what aside from health, what is going on out there. I think that's been great and amazing. And for the idea of what to roll out for the future or what to change, I think it was probably mentioned in the video, maybe Sally, our tech connector, had mentioned about the connectivity issues. So if we've already got 19.5% of people who don't have connectivity, we're having a challenge there about deprivation and exclusion, on top of actually trying to transform health and social care services. So in an ideal world, I'd say just roll out Wi-Fi for everybody everywhere in Scotland, and that solves that issue, so we can get on with wanting to do what we want to do with our project.
Thank you. Joanna, do you want to go next?
So, key learning. Well, I think it's the project has really reinforced my I come from a research background, and so the idea of doing research and finding out the problem before you try and solve it is very familiar to me, but it has reinforced that as the importance of it, and also just how good it is to get people together from different lines of work who often don't talk to each other, often don't really understand each other's experience, and it's so good to get people together. So you've got whether it be GPs or consultants and patients all talking together about issues. I think that's tremendously important. We've all been joking in the chat about saying don't do it during a pandemic, though as I said during the video, actually in some ways trying to do this during the pandemic has been quite a positive thing, because of particularly because of our geography. I think in order the issue that needs to be thought about in terms of change is what we've been doing has been tremendously demanding and time consuming. It's taken a long span of time, but it's also taken a lot of time and commitment from people who are very busy in their work lives already. And I think we have to be realistic about what's possible in the future to make this, the use of the Scottish approach to service design sustainable, so that it can become embedded. It's got to, it can't be too demanding, because people won't do it if it's too demanding of their time and resources.
Thank you. Those are really great reflections there, Joanna, and I couldn't agree more. Matthew.
Thanks. I was thinking one thing that I think we've probably looked at from the perspective in our Pathfinder is starting to see the benefit of climbing up and out of the organizational silos in which we work. Our project is really focused on cross-partnership communication. You know, a partnership of all the talents is what we talked about before. How do we break some of those barriers? And I think when you're inside looking out and you're saying, this is me in a box, how do I work with other people? That's one way of solving the problem. But when you can climb out and look at everybody's box, you know, and the problems that people have, and get a bit meta, I guess, on that, that's when I think the service design principles really start to come in. And that's when you start to think to yourself, hang on a minute, the way I'm looking at this problem is with one particular lens, and I'm going to solve it to suit me if I'm not careful. So I think that's been really important and will help us break the silos, I hope, going forwards. Yeah, don't do it during COVID, a new tool at an unprecedentedly challenging time. I would say something about potentially redesigning the co-design at the front end of this. I think it was an experience, we talked about it prepping for the call. We took quite a bit of time developing from sort of August to February, figuring that out. I think all of us were learning. So by taking that learning forwards and looking at trying to compress that a little bit without losing the advantages of taking your time, or getting, you know, standing on our shoulders next time to go that bit further forwards would be really good.
Brilliant, thank you. Margot, we have 2 minutes. Would you like to give your reflections?
Oh, I didn't know you were coming to me. I do think that developing, the Pathfinders have very, very bravely embraced the approach, the request to come up with something that was about whole system transfer, the request to work very broadly with a whole range of partners, and the learning that we've gleaned from that is so valuable that next time we do this, or if somebody else wants to do it, then the resources, the tools, the advice, the structures that we would have in place, perhaps some of the short circuits that we might have in place. But I would agree with Matthew's point. Yes, this takes a long time, absolutely, Joanna, and it's rare to be able to have that amount of time, and for an organisation to hold that. I think we could do it more slickly, but I think you would not want to miss some of that creating conditions space about forming the partnership, about really designing your interactions before you even start the research with people who use services and citizens that live in your localities. So it's something about taking more time and allowing more time and legitimizing that creating the conditions setup piece.
Thank you. And actually, you kind of gave the kind of reflection that I was going to give, so I don't need to do that now. So thank you all for being on this Q&A, and thank you everyone for your questions and for joining us today. If you do have any final questions, please do put them in the chat box, but I hope you have a lovely rest of your day and enjoy the rest of DigiFest. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks.